Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour. Violence erupts. 3 people are killed in Zimbabwe as soldiers clashed with opposition supporters, accusing the ruling party of trying to rig the election results. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
While the politicians argue, we'll show you what ordinary people in Zimbabwe are saying in their first election since Mugabe.
Europe heats up. Extreme heat is expected to intensify across the continent, with temperatures likely to hit more than 40 degrees Celsius. Filing suit, relatives of 2 Greek fire victims sue state authorities, the fire brigade and the police over their deaths. And rappers brawl. A fight between 2 rival French rappers at a Paris airport quickly descended into a brawl, causing flight delays and partial closures. Thank you for starting your morning with us. Our top story, 3 people have died in Harare after soldiers were deployed to quell protests following Monday's historic election. Troops used live fire, tear gas and water cannon against supporters of the opposition who accused the ruling party of vote rigging. Well, the United Nations Secretary General has called on Zimbabwe's political leaders to exercise restraint. President Emmerson Mnangagwa had promised a peaceful, free and fair election and has blamed the opposition for the clashes. Well, they say the army's reaction was unjustified. Although there is yet to be an official outcome of the election, the ruling ZANU-PF does command a majority. Evelyn Laverick has this report.
Zimbabwe's hoped-for peaceful election erupted into violence in the capital Harare as soldiers tried to disperse stone-throwing opposition supporters. Several people died when troops opened fire. The opposition MDC alliance is convinced that a delay in announcing the presidential results shows the governing ZANU-PF party has rigged Monday's poll.
We are not violent people, but what we need is a transparent election.
I want my vote!
Zimbabwe's president has laid the blame for the violence squarely at the feet of the MDC.
We hold the opposition MDC alliance and its whole leadership responsible for this disturbance of national peace.
Parliamentary results show Mnangagwa's ZANU-PF with a big majority, but the Election Commission hasn't declared the presidential outcome.
The returns for most of the presidential results are actually here with us in the command center. But I've been told that some of the agents for the 23 presidential candidates have not yet presented themselves to Secretariat.
EU election monitors are urging the ZEC to act quickly.
The longer it lasts to count, the more lack of credibility comes up.
MDC leader and Mnangagwa's rival for the presidency, Nelson Chamisa, took to Twitter to accuse the ZEC of manipulating the ballot, but claimed to have won the popular vote. Later, his spokesman condemned the deployment of soldiers.
There is no justification whatsoever for the brutality we experience today. Let us all maintain peace in the country whilst respecting the rights of citizens.
Mnangagwa had intended the election to show a stable country open to foreign investment. Violence on the streets is not the image he wanted. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
And joining us now live from Harare is Pindai Dube, a journalist from our sister channel, Africa News. Pindai, you're there on the ground. What more can you tell us about these clashes?
Yes, thank you. There were a lot of clashes in downtown Harare. It started in the morning when a group of MDC supporters, the opposition, approached the hotel where the votes are being counted. What they want exactly is that they are not happy. They believe elections were rigged by ZANU-PF. They were not expecting that the outcome, especially in the parliamentary elections, which have been announced. During the campaigns, there were a lot of people who attended the MDC rallies, especially in Harare and other rural areas where where ZANU-PF is stronghold. So this is how it happened. They just came and the police confronted them. There were clashes from there.
Yeah, and we talk about allegations of vote rigging. Is there any base to these claims?
Yeah, because what happened is initially, before the elections, the opposition demanded the voters' roll, and it was not provided by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. And also, the observers yesterday, both from the SADC Africa Union, they said that although the elections were initially peaceful, they believe that there was intimidation, especially in rural areas where ZANU-PF is strong, where the traditional leaders were intimidating rural voters. And also, they believe that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission took time to release the V forms which are used at polling station. And also the opposition claims that the figures which are being released are different from the ones which are at the polling stations.
Yeah, and Pindai, when you were there on the streets and you saw the heavy-handedness of the soldiers, was there a feeling that Mnangagwa is actually not keeping his promise of stepping away from, Mugabe's rule, that this is a setback?
Yes, definitely. That's how people felt. They said this is worse. Mugabe also, some were saying Mugabe was a dictator, but he has never sent soldiers in the streets of Harare to kill them. So they believe, when I spoke to some MDC supporters, they said it's better to die than to live under Mnangagwa, who has shown that he doesn't tolerate the opposition by killing them in the streets. So they are very bitter, and people believe this will worsen the Zimbabwe situation, which had free and fair elections, by sending soldiers to crush the opposition voices. So, but now the police claim that 3 people were killed, but the opposition and the other civic society group, even newspapers, independent newspapers in Zimbabwe, they said about 6 people were killed, but although the police and government claims only 3.
All right, thank you for that, for bringing us all the latest from the ground there in Harare. Pindai Dube, a journalist from our sister channel, African News. Thanks. So while politicians continue to argue amongst themselves over who really won the elections in Zimbabwe, citizens, people themselves, have been also reacting and contributing to the discussion. Alex has been following this part of the story.
Good morning, Tessa. Yes, the first elections in Zimbabwe since Mugabe was removed from power. Well, now people there reacting, as we saw in the reports there, on the streets, protesting against what they see as an unfair election. And this is some user-generated content brought to us via the Storyful social media news agency from, they say, central Harare, showing groups of people. It was in these clashes in central Harare that the army then intervened, and we've heard conflicting reports about the number of people who were killed, at least 3 people killed in these protests there. The video's just frozen a bit there, but you see plumes of smoke and large crowds in the centre of town. So we've also seen social media being used by the politicians, ZANU-PF, the ruling party, blaming the opposition on social media on behalf of President Mnangagwa for these violent clashes. That's something, of course, they dispute. The president himself tweeting that he wants to see all sides come together and resolve this situation peacefully. As this day that ended in tragedy, he says, comes to a close, I implore all political and community leaders to come together, seek peace and pursue it. Well, ordinary people are blaming perhaps the politicians for pursuing this division over other things. This one user pointing out, he's a lawyer in Zimbabwe, saying it's strange that the president is the one calling for peace. Only the president, he says, has the authority to send in the army, and yet that's what's happened. So it seems strange the man who might have called on the army to go and quell these protests and bring back order is the one also calling for peace. So there's people disputing the president's accounts of how things are going. Then there's this user, Job. He is a long-time critic of Mugabe. This is a post from his Facebook page in which he says, gunshots at my house as I speak. My family is scared, but I am reassuring them that I am prepared to die and they should move on if people are trying to kill me. Now, this user, Job, lots of posts underneath this asking how he is, what's going on. As yet, his situation is not clear. It's unverified. Just want to bring this one up here from a lady in Zimbabwe on Facebook as well, saying it's a sad day for her to be a Zimbabwean, to see witness innocent people die at the hands of the army. The political plays and use of force has cost innocent lives. And I think one thing we're seeing in social media comments from Zimbabwe is that ordinary people are united behind the idea that it is not worth ordinary people dying, innocent lives being lost in a clash between political factions in the country. Let's just bring up this post here, which I think sums it up, really. Sadly, it's not the politicians who die. They will ask you to defend your vote unarmed whilst they move with security. And this comment here is scathing. They are probably discussing today's events over whiskey at some posh hotel. Contrast this with the poor families who are waiting in order to bury their loved ones. So there is a sense among ordinary people in Zimbabwe that these political clashes are not worth innocent lives being lost. So we will stay across this story and what ordinary people in Zimbabwe are posting on social media.
All right,
Tesa.
Thanks, Alex, for bringing us those different voices. Thank you. Now, Saturday is forecast to be Europe's hottest day of the year. Temperatures in Spain and Portugal could almost reach the all-time European record of 48 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, farmers in around a dozen countries, from Ireland to the Baltics, they're continuing to grapple with drought. The unrelenting heat wave has devastated crops, with more than half of the harvest expected to be lost in some areas. James O'Hagan has this report.
Fields turning to dust, rivers drying up and deadly wildfires ravaging the landscape. It's all part of summer 2018 across Europe and much of the northern hemisphere. An unrelenting heat wave has devastated crops, with more than half of the harvest expected to be lost in some areas. Satellite pictures released by the European Space Agency illustrate the effects the current searing temperatures have had on areas of land across Europe. Some arable farmers are facing bankruptcy. States of emergency have been declared in Latvia and Lithuania, while the sun continues to bake Swedish fields that have received only 12% of their normal rainfall. Germany, which is the EU's second largest grain producer after France, is expecting a 20% slump in its harvest. I've been a farmer for 25 years now, and we never had a heat wave like this before. We have massive profit cuts in my business, between 0 and 20%, but on other parts of Germany you see profit cuts of 40 to 70%. With summer harvest this bad, it's only a matter of time until the tremors start to ripple through the markets. Germany's Agriculture Minister Julia Klöckner has expressed concern.
For months there's been barely any rain. The soils are drained, and I have to tell you I'm very worried about the consequences which this drought will have upon many German farmers' families.
For livestock farmers in the UK, the lack of rain means animals can't just be put out to pasture as usual. They're having to dip into winter food rations by supplementing feed with silage. This drives up costs, which will presumably be passed on to the consumer. For others in Denmark, it means sending expensive animals off to slaughter earlier than planned and at a lighter weight than normal. Farmers are united in calling for government help in the short term, but if hot summers are to become the norm, a more strategic long-term plan will be vital. James O'Hagan, Euronews.
And joining us now live from Cologne, Germany, is our correspondent Jessica Salz. Jessica, so we know that July in Germany was the warmest month since records began. And any one of us in Europe, we have been feeling the heat. Tell us what's going on where you are.
Shouldn't be here. In fact, even in a usually warm summer, where I'm standing would be underwater, a sign of just how much the Rhine River here is receding. In fact, the water level of the Rhine is usually somewhere between 3 and 4 meters. Yesterday, the water level went down to 1 meter 35. And this is a huge concern here. It's obviously a big concern for the environment. Fish are finding it very hard to survive in very low levels of increasingly warm water. They're not getting enough oxygen. In fact, piles of dead fish have been found along the stretch of over the 764 miles that the Rhine stretches. So big concerns here about what this means, and of course with no real relief in sight as this hot weather looks set to continue and the Rhine looks set to recede even further.
All right, and what's being done to help people to deal with the heat?
Well, the government in Berlin is waiting until the end of the season to assess how much damage has been done to the environment. That is when they will also agree on the amount of compensation that can be given to farmers for lost crops. But certainly authorities around the country in areas where temperatures have been reaching the high 30s are struggling to provide water and resources for local people. Some places there's been water shortages, but of course authorities providing a lot of advice for people on how to stay cool. And in many areas the the fire services have had to be on standby as earth and forests are becoming increasingly dry. In fact, in a city near here, Bochum, the fire services were used recently to refill lakes and rivers in order to keep the fish alive with a constant flow of cool water.
Yeah, just very briefly, Jessica, how are people reacting then?
Well, people here in Cologne yesterday were using the opportunity of these new beaches popping up around the city to have barbecues and go swimming in the river. But I did speak to them and they do realise that this heat wave and this lack of rain is a big worry here. This time last year they had huge rainfall here and saw floods. So people here are very worried about what these extreme shifts in the environment mean. And of course, where I am in Nordrhein-Westphalia, this region also an agricultural region, huge concerns in agriculture. As one woman I spoke to yesterday who said she has links to the farming community here, she said at the moment everybody is praying for rain.
All right, thank you for that. Jessica Saltz there reporting from Cologne in Germany. Thanks. And do stay with us for more on this story. Later in the show, we'll be speaking to a Norwegian journalist about the unprecedented weather events unfolding in the Arctic Circle. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe. America hits Turkish ministers with sanctions over the jailed pastor Andrew Brunson, who has been held for 2 years. And we'll find out what it means for relations between Turkey and the United States. And we'll be live in Greece, where relatives of a man and a woman who died in the deadly wildfires are seeking compensation from Greek authorities. We'll have more on all those after the break. Your top story on Good Morning Europe. 3 people have been killed in the Zimbabwean capital of Harare after soldiers clashed with opposition supporters, accusing the ruling party of trying to rig the election results. The U.S. has imposed fresh sanctions on 2 Turkish officials in response to the detention of American pastor Andrew Brunson. Brunson was arrested in 2016, accused of attempting to overthrow the Turkish government. He spent 2 years in jail but has since been released on house arrest. The Turkish lira fell to an all-time low against the dollar after the announcement on Wednesday, and Turkey said it will retaliate. And with me is our correspondent, Alistair Sanford. Alistair, just tell us, bring us up to speed. What is this case all about?
Yes, Andrew Brunson has lived in Turkey for over 20 years. He's married with 3 children. He's an evangelical Presbyterian pastor at the Izmir Resurrection Church, just had a small congregation. Now, we know that after the failed coup attempt in Turkey in 2016, tens of thousands of people were arrested as Erdogan clamped down. Andrew Brunson was among them. He was charged with spying and with willingly cooperating with terrorist organizations, among them listed on the charges the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, the Gulen movements, that's the movements linked to the exiled cleric Fethullah Gulen that Erdogan says was behind the coup. Now, the charges could bring 35 years in jail, but to many people outside, they're completely absurd. He's just being targeted because he was a Christian, the Americans say. It's normal that he had contact with people as part of his job. And the implication is that he's being used as a bargaining chip because President Erdogan has hinted that he'd be prepared to do a deal in exchange for Fethullah Gulen. But Washington says that's for the courts to decide. There have been moves to get Andrew Brunson released, but it seems that that potential deal has broken down.
And in terms of rhetoric, we're already seeing the beginnings of a tit-for-tat. What will this mean for U.S.-Turkey relations?
Well, it's potentially huge. We've got an unprecedented situation of a clash here between 2 NATO allies. Donald Trump and his Vice President, Mike Pence, who's got links to the evangelical community, had been threatening large sanctions. And now the U.S. has acted against these 2 top officials. This was the announcement by the White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders yesterday.
The president has been closely following the ongoing situation in Turkey involving Pastor Andrew Brunson. We've seen no evidence that Pastor Brunson has done anything wrong, and we believe he is a victim of unfair and unjust detention by the government of Turkey. At the president's direction, the Department of Treasury is sanctioning Turkey's Minister of Justice and Minister of Interior, both of whom played leading roles in the arrest and detention of Pastor Brunson.
Now, Turkey has responded angrily to that. President Erdogan had already said that the country won't be bullied. 4 political parties have issued a joint statement condemning those sanctions. The Foreign Ministry has described it as a hostile act. Turkey's foreign minister is due to meet Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, this week. But these sanctions on the individuals may just have a limited effect. But there's a wider impact here because they could go further. The US could squeeze financing that the Turkish economy badly needs. And just the anticipation of these sanctions was enough to send the lira down to an all-time low against the dollar yesterday.
Indeed, it has. Thank you for that analysis, Alistair Sanford. Thanks. Now, a new outbreak of the Ebola virus has been reported in the Democratic Republic of Congo. 4 people have tested positive in the east of the country. The World Health Organization says an ongoing conflict between government forces and armed rebels in the region is making it harder for aid workers to intervene to protect the population. Danish police say they won't be prosecuting hundreds of demonstrators who marched on the streets of Copenhagen wearing niqabs and burqas, now to protest against a new law which makes it illegal to wear face-covering veils in a public place. The police explained that wearing a veil is permitted when participating in peaceful protests. The United States is threatening to impose 25% import tariffs on 175 billion euros worth of Chinese goods in a new escalation of the tit-for-tat trade war between the two countries. Donald Trump's administration said Beijing has failed to address concerns over the protection of intellectual property and state subsidies for industry. Now, the family of a couple who lost their lives in the wildfires which swept through Greece's Attica region last week have sued local authorities and the emergency services for their deaths. As sadness turns to anger over one of the worst natural disasters in Greece's history, this could be the first of many lawsuits filed against the Greek authorities. The fires left more than 90 people dead and sparked a call for new elections. Now, joining us from Mati in Greece is our correspondent, Faye Dulgari. Faye, can you tell us about this case and what we know so far?
Yes, both victims, a man and a woman, they were trying to escape the flames, and they were found dead 400 meters from their house. Actually, the man, a 70-year-old teacher, he was trapped in his garage while his wife and their friends from the United States were trying to get to the closest beach to get saved. When they arrived there, the wife decided to go back to try to save her husband. She arrived back, she found him, but unfortunately they both found tragic death just a short while after. So the authorities, because of this lawsuit, could be liable for criminal charges such as involuntary manslaughter, bodily harm, exposure that led to death, and arson. In what they call in the lawsuit a biblical catastrophe. The suit was filed against the General Secretary of Civil Protection, Attica Regional Governor, and Marathon Mayor, and of course against some local authority officials. This is the first lawsuit, as you said, but speaking to relatives of the victims last week, they were telling us when all the period of grieving ends, and when they get over the first shock, they're going to go to the courts because their anger is growing. You have to know that many people, many of their relatives are survivors themselves. So they know, they have a very clear picture about what happened at the moment. They're very angry, they're very sad. And they say that they're going to court to demand answers for the, as you said, the worst tragedy in Greece the last years.
And obviously, Faye, this is an additional headache to the government of Alexis Tsipras, because this is in addition to the blame game between the authorities themselves, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Since the first moment, I could say, we have been watching a blame game between the central government and the local authorities. The central government and the services like the fire department and the police, they say that they didn't make any mistakes. They say that they urged the mayors to evacuate. And on the other side, the mayors say that the instructions that they got from the central government and the services were not enough. So the investigator that has opened an investigation is expected to give answers to these questions.
All right, thanks for that. Our correspondent in Greece, Faye Dulgari there. Thanks. And still to come on the program, the moment of impact. We'll look at the dramatic new footage of the plane crash in Mexico, where all 103 people on board survived. And over in the Cube,
2 of France's biggest rappers are arrested after an airport brawl. We will have the story after a short break.
watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, the Spanish Coast Guard have rescued over 100 migrants and brought them safely into the port of Algeciras in southern Spain. UN figures show Spain has accepted more migrants than Italy in 2018, with 23,000 arriving by sea. Euronews' Nicholas Wells has the story.
The European Commission has pledged to increase funding to Spain to help cope with a rise in migration across the Mediterranean. It comes after Spain's Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez expressed concern about the increase in migrant arrivals this year. On Tuesday, the Spanish Coast Guard rescued another 100 migrants on 6 boats. They were taken to the port of Algeciras to await transfer to reception centres.
The situation is very difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult. But on va faire avec. Yeah, you understand? Yeah, but it's very difficult. Yeah, it's difficult. See, when I sleep, where we sleep, is not good. See, yeah, it's not good. See, the toilet. See, so it's not good. Yeah, it's not good.
Since coming to power 2 months ago, Sanchez has offered shelter to hundreds of migrants rejected by other European nations. It's drawn criticism from opponents who accuse him of encouraging people to travel there while other countries tighten border controls.
Nicholas Wells reporting there. Now, dramatic new footage has emerged of the plane crash in Mexico on Tuesday. Images captured by one of the passengers after they escaped from the Aeromexico flight shows the plane on fire as the travelers attempt to make their way from the immediate area. All 103 passengers managed to escape with their lives, a total of which includes 99 passengers and 4 crew members. Many are currently receiving treatment in hospital. Well, the footage joins mobile phone images taken within the plane showing it struggling to take off during a hailstorm. Aeromexico flight 2431 came to a stop just 300 yards from the runway of General Guadalupe Victoria International Airport in Durango. NBC correspondent Tom Costello has the story.
Cell phone video captures the moment Aeromexico Flight 2431 begins its takeoff roll down the runway. The weather outside growing worse by the second. Suddenly, just as the plane begins to lift, it's violently slammed back down to the ground. Skidding off the runway into the desert, frantic passengers stepping over each other to escape the burning plane. Ramin Parsa took the video.
People were screaming, and I was praying. I was praying to the nombre de Jesus, at the nombre de Jesus. So Jesus saved our lives.
Firefighters rushed to the scene as passengers and crew jumped down the emergency escape chutes.
The cabin just started filling with black smoke. At that point, what we wanted to do was we wanted to try to find the nearest exit.
Also on the plane, Father Ezequiel Sanchez from Illinois and 15 friends celebrating his birthday.
Yes, I do think it was a miracle.
Father Sanchez now being treated for multiple arm fractures. We spoke to him by Skype from his hospital room.
If the plane was traveling a little faster before it hit the embankment, or it flew a little higher, I don't think we would have walked out with all of us intact.
In all, 49 people hospitalized, including the pilot and a passenger, both in critical but stable condition. The regional jet, an Embraer 190, was departing from Durango in northwest Mexico for Mexico City, just as the weather suddenly turned violent. Rain, high winds, and hail. U.S. aviation sources say the plane may have been hit by a microburst rolling across the airfield. Had it been any higher than 50 to 70 feet off the ground, there could have been fatalities. Still, it's the latest in a string of plane crashes in which everyone has gotten out alive. From an Air France crash in Toronto to a Continental crash in Denver, a British Airways crash in London, a devastating fire in Las Vegas, to a fire on an American plane in Chicago, now Durango, Mexico.
The big concern, though, as with all these other accidents that are survivable, people are still taking carry-on luggage with them. You've got to leave it behind. Your life is more important than your carry-on baggage.
NBC's Tom Costello reporting there. Well, coming up, we will look again at all the top stories, including that story everybody's talking about, the heat wave that's sweeping across Europe. We'll be live in the Arctic Circle, where temperatures reach an incredible 32 degrees. Plus, an airport brawl between 2 French rappers caused flight delays as well as a terminal closure. And Swedish crown jewels, the manhunt is still underway. We'll be live in Sweden. But before that, we'll leave you with a first comment of the day from Zimbabwe, where soldiers clashed with opposition supporters, accusing the ruling party of trying to rig the election results. Your top stories in Good Morning Europe. Violence erupts. 3 people are killed in Zimbabwe as soldiers clash with opposition supporters, accusing the ruling party of trying to rig the election results. Europe heats up. Extreme heat is expected to intensify across the continent, with temperatures likely to hit more than 40 degrees Celsius. Filing suit. Relatives of 2 Greek fire victims sue state authorities, the fire brigade, and the police over their deaths. And rappers brawl. A fight between 2 rival French rappers at a Paris airport quickly descended into a brawl, causing flight delays and partial closures. Now, even the extreme north isn't escaping the heat, with temperatures in the Arctic Circle reaching upwards of 32 degrees Celsius. On Tuesday, the weather station in Banak in the far north of Norway recorded temperatures of 32.4 degrees Celsius. That particular area in Norway has an average maximum temperature in summer of 16 degrees Celsius. Scientists say that every decade there is 10.4% less Arctic ice in the summer. This means that within most children's lifetimes, the Arctic will be ice-free in the summer. Well, joining us live now from Tromsø in northern Norway with the latest on this is journalist Knut Sætre. Thank you, Knut, for joining us today. Now, 32 degrees. This is not a normal temperature you'd hear from the Arctic Circle. So can you tell us what you've been witnessing, the effects of this?
Well, 32 degrees is not normal at all. And actually, it's the first time in August we had temperature over 30 degrees. The last record was 28.8 degrees, and that's 7 years ago. So, of course, we are concerned because the last week has been extremely hot in this area. And when we are in Arctic, 30 degrees is actually extreme hot.
Yeah, so if you compare it to the average August day, I mean, this is really way off the charts.
Yes, never experienced anything like that in August ever, or since we started to record the temperature. That's almost 100 years ago.
So what is the reaction from people? I mean, are they feeling shocked? Are they afraid? Or what? Is it fun? Can you tell us how they're reacting?
Well, of course, people are concerned about the climate change, and climate change is expecting to accelerate in the Arctic area in the next few decades and contributing to major ecological and economical changes. However, this year hasn't been so hot. It has only been for the last few days or since the last week. This summer has been quite cold, actually, now they are mostly just enjoying a summer temperature that they will normally only experience when they are on holiday in Central or Southern Europe.
Indeed. Okay, thank you for that. Knut Sætre there giving us the picture from somewhere in the Arctic Circle there. Thank you. Now, the presumed remains of U.S. soldiers have landed in Hawaii 55 years after the end of the Korean War. Honor guards carried multiple cases draped in American flags into an airport hangar in a military ceremony in Hawaii's Pearl Harbor. Donald Trump tweeted Kim Jong-un to thank him again for releasing the remains and said he looked forward to seeing him soon. Now, firefighters in the U.S. are still battling to contain wildfires in Northern California. At least 8 people have died this year and 4 remain missing as fires burn in multiple areas in the state, with one covering over 470 square kilometers. The governor of California, Jerry Brown, has blamed climate change for the increase in wildfires across the country. Now, 2 of France's biggest rival rappers, they were at a fight at the airport, and this descended into a mass brawl, causing flight delays and a closure of a terminal. Alex has been following this story. Lots of videos for this one, Alex.
Lots of videos. You can imagine you're there in the departure lounge. Not only do you see 2 well-known faces from the French and the rap music scene, but then they start fighting. So a lot of people filming, streaming, sometimes in the middle of what's going on. But for those of you who perhaps don't know, this is Booba. He's a big rapper here in France in particular. Over 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify alone. Also, all these other platforms you can see here, Deezer, Apple Music, Amazon Music. You can see this is a big music star. He is one of France's biggest rappers. Well, so is Kaaris here Now, another user with more than a million monthly listeners on Spotify, another big rapper here in France. These two artists had previously collaborated. They had been working together. They worked together in 2012 on a track, but their relationship had deteriorated. They'd exchanged insults on social media, at concerts, but this is the moment when yesterday there was a punch-up between these men and their entourage at Paris's Arcilla airport. You can see here it involved not just the two artists, but also their minders as well. Police confirming that 11 people overall, including the two artists, were arrested following this. And obviously, this led to the closure of the temporary closure of the departure lounge here at Paris's Arcilla airport. The airport agency saying police intervened, the arrest took place, and after minor delays, things were returned to normal. But shocking scenes, really, from two men who have become now very, very literally rivals in every sense. There's conflicting arguments about who started the fight, but the reality is, for passengers there, it was quite a disturbing thing to witness. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Alex. Now, still to come for you on Good Morning Europe. Could it still be coming home? England confirms it will be bidding to host the World Cup in 2030. We'll tell you about that after a short break. Your top story in Good Morning Europe. 3 people were killed in the Zimbabwean capital as soldiers clashed with opposition supporters, accusing the ruling party of trying to rig the election results. Now, it's been more than 50 years since England last hosted the Football World Cup. And now the country, which claims it invented the game, is weighing up whether to make a bid to host the tournament again in 2030. I'm joined by Euronews' Vincent McAviney, who is at the Wembley Stadium for us. Vincent, so what is prompting England to put its name in the hat for this?
Good morning, Tessa, from Wembley, the so-called home of football. And the English FA, which is based here, made this announcement that they're going to investigate going for the 2030 World Cup. Now, obviously, it's a very prestigious tournament. It's also very lucrative for the host country. And they're buoyed by the recent performance of the England team in Russia. They reached the semi-finals for the first time in decades. So they're going to be doing a feasibility study over the next couple of months. There are already enough world-class stadiums in England to host the game, so it's not a question of infrastructure, but more whether or not they trust the process that FIFA will be using to determine who will get these games. They'll then make a final decision next year on whether to go for it. But people here well remember in 2010, England made a bid for the 2018 games. It was led by Prime Minister David Cameron, David Beckham and Prince William. They went in with high hopes but were disappointed, and there was controversy around the way that bidding process was conducted. It led to investigations. So the FA will be wanting to know that the transparency reforms put in since Sepp Blatter stood down as president of FIFA are going to ensure a fair fight to get this tournament.
All right, Vincent, what are the chances of this bid succeeding, that indeed it will be coming home?
Well, the biggest competition will be the South American bid. Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay have done a special joint bid, and the tournament will be the 100th anniversary of the World Cup, and the first one was actually played in Uruguay. So there's a strong feeling from them that it should return there. They wouldn't be the first country to host it jointly. Japan and South Korea did it in 2002, and in 2026 it'll be between 3 countries, Mexico, the US and Canada. So there is a precedent now for 3 countries hosting, but obviously the English FA will be making much of the idea that football was allegedly invented here in England. It would be football coming home, and it would have been 64 years since England last hosted this tournament when they won here at Wembley.
I like that you say allegedly there. Thank you, Vincent McAviney there from in front of the Wembley Stadium. Thanks. Now, 2 thieves are still on the run after stealing 17th century Swedish crown jewels from a cathedral in Strängnäs on Tuesday. 2 priceless crowns and an orb were stolen around midday by 2 men who subsequently made their getaway in a boat. A search for the thieves involving helicopters and boats was quickly launched, but they have yet to be found. Now, one man who saw the thieves escaping described the moment that they got away.
The boat was there, a white little boat with an outboard motor on the back. The 2 men hurriedly jumped on board and it sped off in that direction over that way. And we then contacted the police and told them, and they told us that they had taken something from the cathedral.
Well, joining me now to tell us more is Karin Moberg-Granström, a journalist from the Swedish news channel Aftonbladet. Thank you, Karin, for joining us today. So 2 crowns and an orb have been stolen. Can you just tell us how important these crown jewels are?
They're very important. They're, as you know, they're from the 17th century. They're from 1611, which means that they're older than 400 years. And they belong to Charles IX and Queen Christina the Older. And they were actually never worn by the royalties. They were made for the burial regalia. So they're actually art relics, but they're covered with gold, with jewels, with pearls, and they're quite invaluable because they're pretty much impossible to sell, which means that this was probably a commissioned job. That's what crime experts are telling us. This is, of course, not confirmed right now since no one actually has been arrested.
Yeah, and I think Swedish people are quite attached to these crown jewels as well. So what about looking for those men? What is the next step in the search, and why is it so difficult, actually?
It's difficult because, as you know, they actually jumped into a boat next to Strängnäs, and in the Stockholm area there are a lot of lakes surrounding the area, which means that they could get pretty much anywhere. And they actually, what is new that we know of is that they jumped on 2 ladies' bikes from the cathedral and went down to the water, jumped into a small motorboat, and there was a manhunt yesterday, but no one has been arrested so far. Yesterday, the cathedral was closed, and there were technicians working on it and trying to secure some evidence from the heist, and hopefully they got something. Nothing is confirmed yet. So they're still looking for these people. They have no one that is arrested right now, but the man goes on. And of course, this is priceless, and it's quite difficult heist because the bishop is really upset, calls it an emotional heist, and this was like really a big deal.
Yes, I assume it is. Thank you for bringing us the latest there. Karin Moberg-Granström, their journalist from Swedish news channel Aftonbladet. Thanks. And still to come for you on the program, banned from the tube. We'll take a look at the adverts deemed so offensive they were removed from the London Underground. More on that after the break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Our next story, the London Underground. They have banned a series of adverts for funeral and cremation services, and that's got a lot of you talking. Alex is following this story. Alex.
Tessa, it's a bit of a tricky conversation over breakfast, isn't it? But that's perhaps why some of the people on their morning commute were so upset at posters like this one. You can look at it and think it looks like a holiday poster to start with, doesn't it? But when you look closer, those aren't surfboards, those are coffins. And when you read the caption, low cost, no fuss cremation here, all-inclusive, roasting temperatures, depart from anywhere. And up here, 870 degrees. It's made to look like a holiday advert. The idea being the company behind it saying they want to up the conversation about death, funerary costs, so that people start talking about it. There was also this this advert here saying, don't get RIP'd off. Again, going back to that idea of cost. It looks like a car advert, but these in the background are coffins. So the company behind it, responding to Transport for London, who operate London Underground, they removed the posters after people were offended. Well, the company saying, company Beyond Life, saying, we're trying to up the conversation and stop people being ripped off by predatory firms. If people don't talk about death, it might be awkward, but if they don't talk about it, the prices will remain high. Well, there was mixed response to these posters. This user, Ella here, saying on Twitter that she was disgusted by these Facebook, saying they're in poor taste, not what I need to see every morning at 7:30 a.m. But then there were other people who had a very different view to this, like Craig here. Craig saying, totally impressed with @Beyond Life UK. That's the company behind the posters. I've said for years that the funeral industry was ripe for disruption, and this looks like it could be starting to do that. Now, it's Transport for London, who operate the London Underground, who have taken down posters like this one and also this one as well, but they are still posted elsewhere in the capital city. So it's divided people's views. What do you think? Is this a great way to restart the conversation and to disrupt an industry that might be ripping people off, or is this in poor taste? Let us know your thoughts using #theCUBE.
Well, I can understand why that would get people talking. Thanks for that, Alex. And thank you for joining us in Good Morning Europe. Do stay with Euronews for all of your top stories. We'll leave you with today's No Comment from Italy, Portugal and Japan, where the heat wave is being felt in full force.
taken the first step.